Hello and welcome to the ETski YouTube channel, ETski Tutorials. This is episode 2 of the Shoot 'em Up mini-series, an introduction to video game development. So now that we have it so the player ship can move from side to side, now we're going to make the player ship shoot bullets, and we're going to have a couple of enemies start moving towards the player coming from the top of the screen. Here's a quick overview of what we're going to be doing. Okay, so here is a fastest possible summary of everything that we did in this particular episode. So first of all, we created a new empty game object and we made it a child of the player ship, and basically this bullet spawn game object is just meant so that we can remember where to actually spawn the bullets. And in our player ship, you can see that we have a new variable called bullet spawn, which we just drag and drop that there to remember where the bullet spawn is. And then we also have a new variable to save the prefab bullet, which we will get into in just a second. So let's go ahead and go over to the player script. So as you can see, we added two new variables. We have a bullet, and this is of type game object. So this is going to remember the bullet prefab, and then we have bullet spawn, and this is of type transform. This is going to remember where we're going to spawn that bullet. And then we have inside of the update loop, we have if input.getButtonDown jump, and we have jump because by default jump is spacebar. So basically we're saying if we press the spacebar down, we're going to instantiate, which means to create a bullet at the bullet spawn position and the bullet spawn rotation. So that creates our bullets. Now let's take a look at the bullet script. So the bullet script, we only have a variable bullet speed of type float, and then we have a countdown timer. So bullet speed is how fast the bullet moves, and then the countdown timer, it's going to count down, and when it reaches 0, it's going to destroy itself. So those are these three lines of code here. Countdown timer minus equal time.delta time to make sure it counts down at 1 per second, and when it reaches 0, it's going to destroy itself. Here we have the line of code that's going to make our bullet move up at the bullet speed, which is just transform.position.z plus equal bullet speed times time.delta time. And then we saved our bullet inside of a prefab with all that information there. And for now, our bullet is just a sphere. All right, and then we have our enemy script, and we have move speed. So this is how fast the enemy moves down. Kill position Z. So this is how far down the enemy needs to move before it destroys itself, so that we don't have tons and tons of copies of the enemies. And then we have horizontal random, just to make sure that enemies aren't coming down in a single file line. It just spreads them out horizontally. So inside of function start, so this is called when the enemy is created, we affect the X position of the transform, and we add random.range between horizontal random and negative horizontal random. So this is just spreads them out horizontally randomly. Okay, and then inside of the update loop, so this is called every single frame, it's going to move down at move speed on its Z axis by move speed times time.delta time. And then if we are lower than the kill Z position, then it is going to destroy itself. And the enemy is saved inside of a prefab. And then we have an enemy spawner script, and we have a game object variable called enemy, and this is going to save the prefab of the enemy that we want to create. And then we have seconds between, and this is a variable that's going to save how many seconds in between every single enemy that we create. And then we have a variable track timer, which is actually going to be the actual variable that's going to be counting down. So inside of the update loop, we minus equal time.delta time from the track timer, and then if it's smaller than equal to 0, so it's just counting down to 0, and once it reaches 0, we're going to create an enemy at transform.position and transform.rotation, and then set the timer back to seconds between so that it can count down again, and then create another enemy. And then we have the enemy spawner. Let me select it. It's just an empty game object with only the script, and it's just a little bit above where the camera can actually see. And that is how we created everything inside of this episode. If you have any comments or suggestions about this video, please let me know in the comments below. I read all of the comments and I try to respond to as many of them as I can. Also, if you haven't already, check out the Kickstarter page, link in the description below. We're running a Kickstarter right now for the Ultimate Game Dev Tutorial Series, a tutorial series that's going to teach you how to create an entire video game completely from the ground up. Alright, that's everything we need to talk about right now, so let's go ahead and just jump right into the tutorial. Alright, so here we are once again inside of the Unity editor. So today we're going to be creating a bullet and an enemy ship, and we're going to have them spawn and move, and they're going to look like they work, but they're not going to quite work all the way yet. We're just going to have them move the way that we want them to in this episode, and then in our next episode we will actually make them have actual gameplay and actually do stuff. But for now, let's just make them move like they're doing cool stuff. Alright, so first let's start with the bullet. So let's create a sphere for our bullet, and there's two ways that we can do that. We can go to create right under hierarchy and then go to sphere, or let me move my window over so that you can see it. You can go to game object, create other, and then go to sphere. Either way, it's exactly the same. Whoops, let me move this window back where it belongs. Alright, and let's go ahead and set that position to 0, 0, 0. That doesn't really matter as much. I just kind of want it to be next to the ship, and I'm going to move it over just a little bit. And let's go ahead and scale it down just a little bit, just so that it looks kind of like a little energy ball or something like that. Like we can add a cool looking texture on it later, but for now, let's go ahead and just leave it as gray. And let's rename it to bullets, and then it doesn't really matter. Well, let's get those semicolons out of there. Let's just leave letters in there. So let's just call it something like that for now, because that's going to change very soon. Alright, so here is our bullet, and let's go ahead and create a new script. So let's go over here to our assets folder under the project window, and then go to create, and then go to JavaScript. Alternatively, you can also select what folder you want it to appear in, and then you can go to create and then go to JavaScript. And let's call this bullet. Alright, so let's go ahead and open that up inside of, and blah, 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 I can't talk, inside of MonoDevelop. And once again, we have a new script, and let's go ahead and delete the pragma strict, and let's create a new variable, and let's call it bullet speed. It's going to be a float, and let's go ahead and have that have a default of, I don't know, 25, because it's a bullet. It's going to move pretty fast. Alright, so I think we are not going to need function start, because this is going to be a pretty simple script. Actually, let's go ahead and add one other variable. Let's go var, and let's call this countdown timer float, and let's have this be 5. So countdown timer is going to be a countdown timer, and when this counts down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, it's going to destroy itself, because we don't want too many bullets in our scene. If we keep on creating bullets and we never delete them, there's just going to be tons and tons of bullets in our scene, and potentially our game could run kind of slow. So yeah, let's go ahead and go inside of function awake, and let's do transform dot position dot z plus equal bullet speed times time dot delta time. Whoops, hit the wrong key. There we go, just like that. Alright, so that is pretty simple. So basically, let me go over here. So, why didn't it select? There we go, I selected it. Okay, so here we have the z-axis, which you can see is labeled right there, and it's also, you can see that positive z is blue, and it's pointing that way, so that's pointing forward. So we want to add to the z-axis. So as we add to it, and as you can see, when I drag the z position up here, it will move forward. So the script will have it move at a constant rate, and it'll shoot forward like that. So let me press Control Z to move it back into position, and then Control S or Command S if you're on a Mac to save our scene, just to make sure everything stays the way that it is. So this script is going to make sure that the bullet shoots forward at that speed. But let's add one more thing. Let's do countdown timer minus equal time dot delta time. So what that is going to do, kind of like how we have this adding every single frame, when you do minus equal, it's subtracting every frame. So we're just minus equaling time dot delta time, which basically means 1 per second. So when we minus 1 per second, this is going to count down at 1 per second, and it's going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it's going to keep counting down. But the way that we have it right now, it's going to get to 0, and then it's going to get to -1, and then it's going to keep on counting down. So what we need to do is we need to put an if statement. We're going to do if countdown timer is smaller than or equal to 0, then we are going to destroy, wait, did I spell that right? No, there's no S. Destroy game object. And there we go. So that is basically everything that we need inside of the bullet script. So basically we're saying if the countdown timer is smaller than or equal to 0, so if I just had equal to 0, there's a chance that the countdown timer would go from, say, 0.1 to negative 0.2 or some numbers like that, and it might skip over 0 completely. So that's why we do smaller than or equal to 0. So if it skips over 0 and then it's smaller than 0, it's still going to run this next line of code once it is smaller than or equal to 0. And then when we destroy game object, and right here game object is lowercase, that's very important. So the G is lowercase, but the O is uppercase. So basically what that means is when we say game object and the G is lowercase, we're essentially referencing this right here, or all of this, just the entire game object. We're just going to destroy it. So let's go back over here to monodevelop. Let's press Control S or Command S if you're on a Mac to save it. And then let's drag and drop this bullet script onto our bullet game object. And now we have our bullet script added. So let's go ahead and run the game and see what happens. So it shot off forward, and it's counting down, and then it deleted itself. So that's exactly what we wanted it to do, except we don't want just one bullet to just be there when we start the game. We want to actually create bullets. So to do that, we need a prefab. So what a prefab is basically it's a game object, kind of like what you see in the hierarchy, but it's inside of the project. So instead of being inside of a scene, it's inside of the project. So prefabs are really good for bullets or enemies or ammo or health packs or anything that basically you want to spawn and create copies of. So let's go over to our project window, and inside of the assets folder, let's right click and go to create and then go to prefab, and let's call this bullet. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drag and drop this bullet up here onto there. And then in here, as you can see, it's turned blue. So that means that it is a copy of a prefab. So now we can go ahead and just delete that by hitting the delete key, or you can right click on it and go to delete. All right, so now our bullet's deleted, right? Well, no, because we actually saved it inside of this prefab. So now when I want a bullet prefab in our scene, I can just drag and drop it in there. And I can drag and drop as many as I want. And remember how I named it bullet and then a jumble of letters? Well, I did that because that name doesn't matter, because it's going to get overwritten by the name of the prefab. And now, as you can see, when I drag and drop new prefabs in here, it keeps the name bullet, just like that. So now when I run the game, those are all going to behave just like the bullets. And as you can see, the countdown timer is going down, and they reach 0, and they all destroyed themselves. So let's go ahead and delete those bullets, because we don't want them to actually start at the beginning of the scene like that. We want them to be created when we hit the space bar. So let's go to our player ship, and I'm going to press F to zoom into our player ship. And now I'm going to go to, let me move my window over so you can see it, game object, create empty. And let me drag and drop that back over here. All right, so now you can see we have game object, and it's an empty game object. There's nothing attached to it other than the transform, which is its position, rotation, and scale. But besides that, it's completely empty. So let's rename this bullet spawn. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drag and drop it on top of player ship, just like that. And as you can see, player ship now kind of looks like a folder that you can open and close, and bullet spawn is inside of the player ship. So let me move that over here. Actually, for the sake of demonstration, let me go ahead and create, I don't know, let's create a cylinder. All right, so here's a cylinder, and for now, let's just drag and drop that on top of player ship just to show you how a child works. So a child is whenever you drag and drop a game object on top of another game object, and then it becomes inside of a folder, kind of like that. The player ship is the parent, and these two game objects are children. So watch what happens when I move the player ship. The cylinder moves with it, and so does the bullet spawn. So the children will move in the exact same way that the parent does. So that's basically how that whole system works. So that is how parent and children's work. Parent and children's. Wow, I can't really talk. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete that cylinder because all we need is this bullet spawn. And let's drag and drop this bullet spawn just a little bit in front of the player, like just right about there is probably good. So we can actually leave that just the way it is. And let's go inside of the player ship script, which you can either double click on or you can just go inside of model develop. All right, and now we need to create a new variable, and let's go var and let's call it bullet, and this is going to be of type game object. And just like that, we don't need to define it. We don't need to write equals or anything like that because we're going to do that in the inspector. All right, so var bullet. So bullet is the name of our variable, and the type of the variable is going to be a game object. So instead of saving a number like a float or an integer, it's going to save a game object. And remember, a prefab is also a game object. It's just a game object that's located inside of the project folder instead of inside of the scene. So let's go back over here to game object. So there's our bullet. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down here inside of the update loop. So remember, this is called every single frame. And we're going to do an if statement, and we're going to say if input dot get button down jump. And just like that, and there is our if statement. So input, just like up here, we're getting input, but instead of getting an axis like we did up here, we're going to get a button. And we only want to know when this button is pressed down for the first time. So every time you press down the jump button, which is by default spacebar, so we're not actually jumping, we're just using the default inputs, which you can change later if you want. But basically we're just saying if we press the spacebar, then we're going to run the next line of code. All right. And alternatively, if you want the gun to shoot just every single frame, you can do get button, because this will return true every single frame that the button is held down. But we only want to actually shoot when the button is pressed down. So we only want one shot every time the player presses spacebar. So if we press the spacebar, then we're going to do instantiate. I hope I spelled that right. That's a really, really weird word. So instantiate, which basically means to create a copy of. So instantiate a bullet. So we're going to create a copy of the bullet, which is our variable up here, which we are going to define in the inspector in just a moment. Oh, I forgot. We actually need one more variable. Var bullet spawn. And let's have this be of type, capitalize, transform. So that is going to be of type transform. So this is just going to remember, basically, if I click on bullet spawn, it's going to remember this part of the game object. So we're not remembering the entire game object, just the position, rotation, and scale of it. So bullet spawn. So that's how we're going to know where to spawn the bullet. And that's what we're going to tell the instantiate function right now. So we're going to create a copy of the bullet, which is a prefab. And we are going to create it at bullet spawn dot position, and then we want to tell it what rotation we want to create this bullet at, and we want it to have the same rotation as the bullet spawn. So we're going to do bullet spawn dot rotation, just like that, and then put a semicolon just to end the line of code. And there we go. Now we have if input dot get button down jump. We are going to create a bullet at the bullet spawn in the same rotation as the bullet spawn. So let's go ahead and set that up. So let's go to our player ship, and as you can see, we have two new variables. So let's start with the bullet. All we have to do is go to the prefab, which is right here, and drag and drop it right there. And now our script remembers that when it creates a bullet, it's going to create a copy of this prefab. So if we create any other bullets in the future, we can swap it out for that new bullet. All right, now we want to remember the bullet spawn. So when remembering the transform or any other components of a game object, you can just drag and drop the game object from the hierarchy and it will automatically save the transform. As you can see, it says transform in the parentheses right there. And I believe that is everything that we need to do. So let's go ahead and hit run. And then when I press spacebar, it shoots. So now when I move the ship over, shoots over there. So now our game is actually really starting to look like a shoot 'em up. All right, cool. So now that we have bullets, let's create an enemy. All right, so in the tutorial after the next tutorial, we're gonna start actually creating some real 3D models and make these actually look like spaceships and stuff. But for now, let's go ahead and create a cylinder, and that is going to represent what the enemies are going to be. So let's go ahead and set that to 0, 0, 0. And then let's drag it on the Z-axis, which actually let me reorient my scene view so that it makes a little bit more sense. Let me just go ahead and drag and drop it up here out of view just a little bit. And let's go ahead and call this enemy. And let's go ahead and add, a bunch of letters just like we did before with the bullet, because we're going to put that inside of a prefab and it's going to overwrite this name just like it did with the bullet prefab. Okay, so now let's create a new script. So inside of the asset folder, right click, create JavaScript, and let's just call this enemy. All right, cool. So here is our enemy script, and let's open that up, and let's go inside of monodevelop, delete the pragma strict, and let's create a new variable, and let's call this move speed. I believe that's the same name as the variable inside of the player script. Oh no, we called it player speed. But if it was the same name, that's okay, because all of the variables, unless it's a static variable, which we'll get into later, that's kind of an advanced thing. But unless it's a static variable, like if it's just a regular variable like what we're doing right now, it's okay if you have the same names of variables between scripts because they're unique to the scripts. So anyways, we have a new variable called move speed, and that's going to be of type float. And let's by default have it equal, I don't know, 8, which once again we can change later if we want to. All right, so let's go ahead and start with that. And inside of the update loop that happens every single frame, or function update, we're going to do transform.position.z minus equal, because we want the enemy to actually move downwards towards the player. We're going to do minus equal move speed times time dot delta time. And that is going to make just like the bullet, except it's moving in the opposite direction. So let's go ahead and give the game a run. Oh, well, first we got to drag and drop the enemy script onto the enemy. So let me select it, and there you can see the enemy script. And let's go ahead and just run it really quickly and see what happens. And as you can see, the enemy just moves down, and that's all it really does. So let's add a few more things to the enemy script. Like, let's see, let's call it var, and let's call it, I don't know, kill z position, and let's have that of type float, and let's have that by default equal, I don't know, how about -3? Actually, let's go into here and test it. So if I move here and I keep moving down until we're out of view, I think -6 will actually be a better number. But once again, we can edit this in the inspector later if we want to. So basically, I'm going to have an if statement, and I'm going to say if the enemy is lower than kill Z position, then we're going to destroy it. So just like the bullets, we don't want tons and tons of enemies in our scene if you can't even see them. They're just going to slow down our game and waste CPU power. So let's go ahead and say if transform, we don't want that to be capitalized, we want the T to be lowercase. All right, so if transform, what in the heck just happened there? Stupid autofill. All right, let's try that one more time. If transform dot position, I got it. Stupid autofill. This is really just giving me trouble. All right, there we go. Thank you. That's what I was trying to write. Okay, position dot z is smaller than or equal to kill position z or kill Z position, then we are going to destroy the game object. And there we go. So we're going to destroy the game object if it is lower than -6. So let's go ahead and move that back to where it was up there. And let's run the game and see what happens. So it's going, and it deleted itself. So let's make sure that it doesn't delete itself until it's all the way past. Yep. Okay, it doesn't delete itself until it's all the way past the screen. But if it does delete itself while it's still on the screen, you can just go to your enemy and then go under enemy script and just change this to a lower number, like say -8 or -10 or anything like that. So that is all fine. Actually, I want it to move down a little bit slower, so I'm going to set it to 4. And once again, we can go ahead and adjust it later. So since this is a shoot 'em up, I think it would be pretty boring if all of the enemies just came down the exact same way, all down in a straight single file line. So let's add some variation to how far apart it will actually move. So let's do var horizontal random. I don't know. You can call it whatever you want, but let's just call it that. And let's have that be of type float. And let's by default have it equal 6. I think 6 will probably be a good number. So what we are going to do is under start. So remember, this is called either at the start of the game or when the game object is created. And because we're going to be spawning these enemies, the start function is going to be called every time that we spawn a new enemy. So what we're going to do is we're going to do transform.position.x plus equal. So remember, unlike when we write plus equal or minus equal inside of function update, function start only happens once. So we're not going to be doing this over time. We're just going to be doing it once, and then we're going to be done with it. So we're going to have it plus equal random dot range. All right. So random.range is a function that basically will return you a number in between a minimum number and a maximum number that you give it. So we're going to give it a horizontal random and then negative horizontal random. And that is all we need. So that's just going to take the position of where the enemy is at right now, and then it's going to randomize the X position of it a little bit, just to make sure that they all aren't coming down at in a single file line. And then it's going to be in between horizontal random and negative horizontal random, kind of like in the player script when we had the max width and negative max width, and we're just doing that but just with a random function instead. So hit Control S or Command S if you're on a Mac, and let's go ahead and give it a run, and let's see what happens. And indeed, the enemy did move over. So let's stop the game. Let's try again. And it moved over to a different place. If we stop the game and run it one more time, it'll move once again to another random place. And let me just make sure it goes over this way too. It's random. There we go. It can go left too. So as you can see, it will move randomly. So now let's create a prefab. So let's go to create prefab, just like we did with the bullet, and let's call this enemy, and then let's drag and drop this enemy right there, just like that. So here we have our enemy inside of a prefab, and as you can see up here, this enemy is now blue, and we can go ahead and delete that one because we have it saved inside of the prefab, and we can drag and drop new enemies into our scene if we want to, but we don't want those there just yet, so let's go ahead and delete those. So now we need to spawn these enemies. So I'm actually going to create a new empty game object. So I'm going to go to, whoops, let me move this window over so you can see it. Game object, create empty. Now let me move this window back over to where you can see it. And let's call this enemy spawner. And this game object is going to spawn our enemies. So let's set it to position 0, 0, 0. And then drag it backwards and we can adjust this later, but let's go ahead and throw it somewhere up there. That'll probably be a good position, but we can go ahead and edit that later. So now let's create a new script, and will be a pretty simple script, I think, and let's call this enemy spawner, and let's go ahead and open that up, and then let's delete the pragma strict, and let's create a variable, and let's call this enemy, and then this is going to be of type game object. So just like when we were creating bullets, it's going to create enemies. And now let's say var seconds between. So these are going to be the seconds in between creating enemies, and we're going to have it be on a timer like that. So this is going to be of type float, and let's have there be, I don't know, 2 seconds in between every single enemy. So it's actually supposed to be equal to. There we go. And now let's have var track timer. And let's have this be a float. And we can go ahead and not set it to anything. It will by default just be 0 or anything that we want to set it in the inspector. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to have the track timer countdown, kind of like when the bullet had a countdown timer, but instead of destroying itself at the end, we're going to have it create an enemy and then set the timer back up to whatever we have the seconds between. So right now that's set to 2. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's do track timer minus equal time dot delta time, just like that. So counting down just like we did on the bullets. And then let's do if track timer is smaller than or equal to 0, then we are going to instantiate an enemy at transform dot position and transform dot rotation. There we go. So every time this timer counts down to 0, we're going to create an enemy at the same position and rotation as the enemy spawner game object, because when we write transform in lowercase, we're accessing the transform of the game object that this script is attached to, which it's not attached yet. We can go ahead and drag and drop it right there, but we still have a little bit of work to do on it. So actually we need to create an opening bracket and a closing bracket, and let's go ahead and line those up so it looks nice. All right, because we want when this equals true, we actually want to do 2 things. So the first thing we do is we create an enemy, and the second thing, we want to set the timer back to 2 seconds, or whatever we set seconds between to be. So we write seconds between, and there we go. We have set the timer back up. And I believe that's everything. I think that's everything that we need to do inside of the enemy spawner. So, oh, I spelled instantiate wrong. So let's go back in here. Instantiate. I just missed an S. Did I spell it right this time? Yes, I did. Okay, cool. All right, so let's create that enemy. Let's put the enemy right there. So remember, I'll go back to my game view. All right, so remember, it's going to create an enemy right there, and then the enemy is going to randomize itself horizontally a little bit. So let's go ahead and run the game and see what happens. So it created 1 enemy, 2 enemies, and now these enemies are coming down, and well, we can pretend to shoot them right now, but actually nothing's going to happen because we didn't code that part of the game yet. But we have some enemies, and yeah, our game is looking like a shoot 'em up even more now. So yeah, I think that's everything that we need to go over in this episode. So if you want to know more about the Kickstarter and the Ultimate Game Dev tutorial series, the tutorial series, that's going to teach you how to create the Indoctrination video game, which I will throw a clip on the screen right now. It's going to show you how to create that entire video game completely from the ground up using all free tools. So if you want to know more about that Kickstarter, check the links in the description below to a link to the Kickstarter page or just more information about the Kickstarter. So until my next video, I will see you later and keep making games.